Welcome back to Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom, part of the Migration Media Network. I'm Brendan Davis, your host, and this week's guest is Eric Selley. Eric is a stand-up comedian here in Beijing. He's part of the comedy club China Folks, and we have had a little bit of a run of comedians here lately, and I think we're about to shift into a little bit of a business and entrepreneur chunk, but it's always fun to talk to people who make you laugh. And of course, we have, a fairly thoughtful conversation, and it's a lot about where Eric's from, where he's going, what he thinks of what's happening here in China. And there's a lot going on here these days. And so to that end, I want to talk about a upcoming feature. I've teased this before. This week will be the very first episode of the Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom side dish, the Big Fish side dish, where I bring back on a previous show guest, somebody who you do or could know from listening to their old episode. And we're going to talk in a very unfiltered, unedited way about things that are topical. So the normal show is someone's kind of story, where they came from, what they're doing, here, or what their connection to China is and what they think of all of it. And it's meant to be sort of more evergreen. And on the side dish episodes, I want to really let people talk about either what they're working on currently or just catching up about something in general, really just having fun. And I think those episodes will be fun. This first one we recorded sure was fun, that I did with Jonathan Garrison. We have a really free-ranging, freewheeling conversation, as they say, about punk rock and hardcore music. And it was pretty fun, and actually, as I listen back to it, I'm giving a little bit of a disclaimer now, because actually, when I edit the episode to put out in a few days, it's going to have music at the top and bottom, and that's it. I'm not going to introduce it during the episode. I'll put this in the show notes as well. I realized what a potty mouth I had. We had a lot more of a free-ranging conversation in terms of the language, for sure, than normal. But it's a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to doing this, where I talk to somebody and really just get to sort of hang out with them. And I don't expect that those will be for everybody, but I think that if you enjoy the guest and it's really a chance to get to hear them in more of an unfiltered, low-pressure setting. Basically, when Jonathan and I recorded the other day, I just kind of forgot about the mic. I can't speak for him, but for me, it seemed like the mics kind of just disappeared at a certain point, and we're just two friends kind of chatting. But it moves pretty fast. We got a lot of information in there, and I think you'll enjoy it. I want to remind you that the show here is sponsored by the Complete Podcasting Course, my course on Udemy, udemy.com. You can find links in the show notes to learn more about that. But basically, if you've ever wanted to do a podcast yourself, or if you are getting started and you feel like you need some help and some additional information, I'm putting everything that I have learned so far and everything that I think would maybe be helpful to somebody. It's all in the course. And they run sales on there all the time. But if it's not on sale and it's the regular high list price of almost $200, you can message me somehow through any of the channels, and I'll send you a coupon to get it for the equivalent of $10 US. So anyway, thanks again for listening. And now, please enjoy my interview with Eric Selley. Well, I'm here to welcome Eric Selley to the show. Eric, how are you, man?
Hey, I'm doing good, man. How you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for coming on the Big Fish.
No problem.
Nice. Well, I have a traditional first question, which is, please tell me the short version of who you are, where you're from, and for you, why China?
All right. Well, my name is Eric Selley, as you just said. I'm from a city called Kitchener, Ontario, which is about an hour west of Toronto in Canada. So I know people confuse me as American all the time, but it doesn't really offend me. So, no, I was a teacher in Canada. I went to school to be a teacher. Graduated in 2014, and when I graduated, there was no real jobs for teachers because Ontario was a really hot spot for teachers at that time. It was just like packed. Basically, everybody wanted to be a teacher. It was a cushiony job. Once you're in, high-paying salary and all that. So going to school, people just told me, like, oh, are you prepared to not have a job for like 2 or 3 years? And I was just always like, nah, I'll take my chances elsewhere. And went online, looked around, and ended up finding a job in Kaifeng, China. So I worked there for a year. And after a year, got to go to Beijing, which I've been here for 2.5 years now.
Very cool. And for listeners who don't know where it is, we were talking beforehand that my friend Ying Li and previous show guest, she's from Kaifeng, so that's kind of how I know about it. But where is Kaifeng?
It's in Henan province. It's about an hour away from Zhengzhou, the capital there. really, it's a historic town. It's an ancient town. I think it was a former capital. People always talk about how good the food is. I didn't really found that, but people, when you tell them that, they love the food there. But yeah, it's a small Chinatown. I'm doing air quotes. I know you can't see them, but about 5 million people live there. But no foreigners. I mean, basically the kids that go to university and then the teachers at the school just outside the city. So not a lot of Western influence there.
And you're a pretty tall guy as well, and you do look pretty, North American.
I do.
To be generic. So I imagine that you blended right in.
I did, yeah. Actually, one of my first weeks there, I was at the grocery store, just like a regular grocery store, and I knew that it was going to be a weird sort of 10 months when I got there, because this lady came up to me just out of the blue at this grocery store and handed me her baby, and proceeded to take a picture with me holding her baby. And nice. I was terrified, I've never held a baby in my life at that point, so
much less at a grocery store. You're like, is this a local delicacy? Do I roast it?
Exactly, yeah. I was so confused.
Are these on sale?
Snapped a picture, and I walked away with my friend just being like, I don't know what that was. I was pretty confused, but I kind of knew then it was going to be a weird sort of quasi-celebrity experience for me for no reason other than the fact that I'm 6'3" and white.
Yeah, most foreigners in general have stories kind of like this. I've said before, I am in many thousands of random people's like vacation photographs for some reason. Like people from smaller towns visiting Beijing.
Yeah, right.
You know, and because again, like you, I'm not tall like you, but I also am very much not Chinese looking. So,
right.
So in terms of Kaifeng, though, it's I've never been there. I've been to all the surrounding places, I think.
Yeah, you gotta go.
And that's what I hear, man. I hear the food's great. I hear the food is the bomb.
Try the noodles.
Let's try the... Nice. So in terms of that being your first exposure to China, how did that start to shape your perception of the country? I mean, what I know, and I didn't ask you this before, so I'm going to discover this. What I know, most of my friends who've done these teaching contracts, you really don't have a lot of opportunity typically to travel.
Right.
For the most, I mean, you're usually pretty wired in to where you are. So I'm guessing you didn't go to Shanghai, go to Beijing right away.
Right.
So what you saw was you probably saw Zhengzhou and Kaifeng.
Yeah. So I was in Kaifeng pretty much up until we had the October holiday. So I had a little time to travel, and that's the first time I went to Beijing. And it was night and day just being, in Beijing. You'd get here and you're just like, what? They have real Western food and stuff like that. And then, so that was my first experience outside of Kaifeng. But yeah, you're right. It was a lot of months on end of not traveling or not leaving the city. So it was, it was interesting at first because it was kind of fun just on weekends, just walking around and exploring because everything was so new. And I still get a little nostalgia for it a little bit because everything was so brand new that you were just, anything excited you. It didn't even really matter what you did. And it was cool because I wasn't really somebody who looked into China a whole lot before I came here. Honestly, I took the job out of a salary. The salary was nice, so I really didn't care where I went when I was looking for jobs. So when I got here, it was just sort of basically experiencing what China was like full on for the first time and for basically the first 6 months of my time here.
So your impressions, your initial, thoughts, I mean, there was all the basic culture shock stuff, but was there anything that stood out to you?
Just the traffic I thought was crazy, the driving too. I wasn't somebody, before I left to come here to China, I had never left North America. So, I'd gone to the States a couple times and, obviously in Canada, but...
U.S. is like Canada, just ruder.
Yeah, well, yeah, I didn't want to say it.
I can say it.
Even just small things like the traffic or just the crowds and the pushing and the babies peeing with no pants. That was a weird one for me.
That's a special treat to get used to. Yeah.
But it was all just I wasn't really ever just turned off by it. It was always kind of just funny to me. It was always kind of just an interesting experience through and through.
Well, you mentioned funny, and we're going to get into this in a lot more detail. We'll cover a little bit more of the history before we get totally into your career path besides education. But I know you from the Beijing comedy scene, and in particular, I've seen you perform at open mics, and I've seen you do killer job hosting.
Yeah.
So how is this something you've always been interested in? And Toronto's known for comedy as well. Is this something that's you've had this bug as a parallel thing, or how'd that develop for you?
Yeah, for sure. I was always a big stand-up fan growing up. Ever since I watched Seinfeld when I was a kid, my parents would watch it. And I remember the first time just watching him sort of in the earlier seasons when he was just doing his act to start the episodes or whatever. Just the idea of somebody on stage talking and making jokes and making an audience laugh. I was just like, I didn't really understand what it was, but I was so pulled by it. And sort of as I went through high school, finding different comedians, Dave Chappelle and Norm Macdonald and a bunch of other guys, I just was always in love with it. And I was, riddled with stage fright, and just the idea of going up and bombing and my friends hearing about it or making fun of me or even being there, God forbid, just terrified me to no end. So I stayed away from the stage until I got here to Beijing. And that's when I kind of, I just rationed with myself, being like, you know what, if you bomb here, nobody will ever hear about it.
Well, when did you start doing comedy here? Were you pretty fresh off the Beijing boat, or
no? It was literally, I was in Beijing for almost a year and like 8 or 9 months before I actually took up the opportunity. I remember I went to a show at Cheers, the old Cheers, I think in Gulo or close to Gulo, but I went to a show there, and Nigel Mainville was on it, and Josh Tyus, who was an old Beijing comedian.
Chatted with him the other day on WeChat.
Yeah.
He's defected
cool
to Shanghai.
Guy, yeah. Shanghai guy now. But they were on the show, and Paul Creasy, another old Beijing comedian. And I remember going to the show and just being like, yeah, this is awesome, and that they have a scene here. And then didn't really return to it until April, I think, 2016. I had kind of made up my mind that I was leaving China at that point, and it was just kind of like, you know what, this is a bucket list thing. Let's do it. If it goes well, we'll do it again. If it goes poorly, at least I can say I tried it. And I had a pretty good set that night. It was fun. I met some of the comedians that were hanging around, and they were all really cool guys and girls. And I think on my second or third mic, I met David Jacobs, who runs Comedy Club China now, and he was really helpful in just being, giving me tips and pointers, and he was sort of the first person to really reach out and be like, yeah, you've got this, work on that. And, I really appreciated him for that. And he definitely gave me the confidence to keep going.
Very nice. This episode will run in a couple of weeks from when I'm recording, but David was on he's on the most recent show as we record. He's on the current show.
I heard.
Was that the Cheers that's my wine store folks?
Yeah, I think so.
Their store in Gulo used to do
they used to do the upstairs.
Right?
Yeah. They used to do shows there, and then they closed down, unfortunately. But we still do shows around the Hutong.
Was that one that got bricked up?
I think so. Yeah, that's one of the ones.
I think that's the story that Claudia told me about. About them selling wine out of like the window.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah,
like a lot of those stores learn how to improvise.
Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. So in terms of, let's go back to your chronology a little bit. Yeah. So you've been in Beijing now. I was not a math major. You'll have to help me. How long is that?
Sure. I've been here. I got here September 2015, and then took a brief hiatus from, I'd say, about June 2017 to February 2018, and I've been back pretty much ever since.
Okay, so I started seeing you. You got right back into comedy, pretty quickly, because I started seeing you. I think
probably
around that.
I came back and I just hit the scene as hard as I could.
Did you do any back in Toronto?
I did. Yeah, did some open mics in Toronto. I got on the local show in Kitchener, where I was from. We had one basically weekly show that's pretty good. Gets a solid audience. It's at a restaurant, so. I did some open mics in Toronto, and it wasn't the same feeling. It was missing sort of that community feeling, because I find with comedy, you really have to immerse yourself into a scene, really get to know the other comics if you want to make it a good time, because especially in Toronto and all these other big cities, you got so many comedians who want to get stage time. You end up doing these open mics and waiting there for 3 hours just for 4 minutes to perform to 3 other people that don't want to listen to your jokes. So it was brutal. I bombed there. I did some comedy in Melbourne in Australia. Same sort of thing, where I just was never immersed into the scene. Didn't really know anybody, so it was a lot of just being bumped down lists and waiting hours and hours to do a set, and not really having a lot of fun doing it. And so
So the community feel for it that's talked about whenever you talk to people here it's a real thing.
Yeah, oh, definitely. For sure it is. Yeah, I think it helps, going to mics, knowing that you're going to see people that you want to talk to. It's definitely been very helpful for me just making friends outside of work. I think that's a thing a lot of people don't get to do. They end up just hanging out with their coworkers all the time. So comedy's been good for that, just meeting people. And a lot of my really good friends now are comics here. So I've really appreciated stand-up for that aspect as well.
Well, there was one thing that we talked about ahead of time, which was, and you mentioned it and you're getting started here on the interview, which was that you went to college for education. So, there's a stereotype, of course, of the English teacher here,
right, yeah.
Which is a well-deserved one, often, of people who like to be sort of a semi-professional alcoholic. But who don't have the credentials necessarily. And for you, this is actually what you're into. You want to be a teacher.
Yeah, I mean, it was something that I kind of learned early in my university career. Just I had a co-op program at my university. I went to the University of Waterloo. If anybody knows where that is, it's pretty famous for engineering, and that's where the guys who started BlackBerry and Research in Motion, they came from. And so I actually worked for them for a few months. Yeah, I kind of learned just through doing co-op jobs that I preferred education as opposed to sitting at a desk and writing and sort of doing that. So I knew kind of right away I was going to do something in education. Went to Teachers College in Ottawa, Ontario, the capital, and just had a great year there. Again, it was a lot of being sort of a semi-professional alcoholic. I mean, it wasn't a ton of work, but
I wasn't trying to judge.
Yeah, well, I mean, truth is the truth. But yeah, so I did that, and I do like teaching, and I've taught in other countries as well. I've taught in Canada and Australia, and I do prefer teaching in China. I think just the students are so much what are way more well-behaved, and the sort of expectations from parents, I think, are a little bit more realistic on their kids. Not maybe not so much on the kids, but definitely they don't blame the teachers for, I think, if their kid's not doing as well, they kind of put the onus on the kid a lot more than the teacher, which is not really a trend that's happening in North America. It seems to go the other way.
Yeah, that's of course one of the things that you hear about in the news is where the parents are being sometimes very aggressive with the teachers.
Exactly.
It's like, why does my kid suck? Well,
you procreated with another guy with an IQ of 70. What did you expect to happen here? It's kind of a little ridiculous, but
nice. Well, we'll try to bring it around to something slightly more uplifting. No. This is your story. It is what it is, man. In terms of education, is this a career that you see continuing to build? Is it something you want to do in parallel with comedy, or is comedy really, got a hook into you and you want to put more time and energy into that? What's sort of your disposition as of, September, whatever it is, 2018?
Sure. I think China's been good for that because I'm able to sort of, my workload's not crazy at my job now. I get a lot of, free time to think about comedy and write jokes and do comedy. So, I think the end game is comedy, whatever city that ends up being in, I'm not sure. But yeah, once I started doing comedy, it was kind of like a bug, it was just like, people say it's like a drug. Once you get your first laugh, and it's just like, I need more of that. And I definitely feel that. And I think comedy is sort of what I want to work towards as a career. But teaching does allow me to sort of make money here in China, especially. And focus on the craft as well as make a living, because there's no real you can't really make an income here unless you're Joe Wong as a comedian, especially not as a foreign comedian. So
in terms of your approach to it, how would you describe yourself as far as comedy goes? Like, are you a joke guy, story guy?
Yeah, I'm a joke guy. I like to have nice and tight jokes. I like to get my punchlines in early and often, and I kind of. I've always been inspired by the New York style guys, the guys that would perform at the Cellar,
Attell,
like the Attells of the world, exactly. And there's a new group there where they all really just have really tight jokes, and that was sort of inspiring to me because I forget who said it. One of them was talking about it. You're performing in New York. You gotta bring it every night. You have to have the laughs early and often because the audience, they're expecting good things, and if you're telling these 3-minute long stories where there's no joke really necessarily, people are going to kind of go, well, get this guy off, let's get the next guy on. So yeah, I would describe myself as more writing heavy, And then I've kind of worked on my delivery a little bit to enhance that. But yeah, I would definitely say I'm more of a joke guy.
What are some of the things you mentioned that David Jacobs gave you some tips and some pointers? Anything you can remember that he helped you with in the getting started?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first time he really saw me, it was like my second open mic. It was at the bar Hot Cat, where we used to do the open mics there. And I remember there was like 2 or 3 people in the crowd that night, and just performing for really nobody except for him and like a couple other comedians. And for whatever reason, I was doing like a little bit of crowd work with the 2 or 3 people in, and he took to that and was just like, "You're doing crowd work on your second mic. That's pretty crazy. Like that's cool. Here's some advice about crowd work. Don't give the microphone necessarily to the audience. You want to be in control of it all the time." I remember him saying that, and he would just sort of help me with different approaches to joke writing and in ways of going about writing sets and that, because I remember asking him, like, should I be doing the same jokes all the time? And he was like, yeah, but you're only going to do 2 or 3 mics here as opposed to getting multiple opportunities every night. So you want to kind of have something fresh all the time, which is really difficult. And that sort of, definitely gives, I think, comedians here an advantage to what they do, because you're constantly trying new material and you're constantly trying to get other stuff to work, because you don't want to keep doing the same 5 or 6 jokes because the audience is only so big, right? You're going to get a lot of repeats, and people are going to kind of get tired of you if you're just doing the same act every time. So
in terms of the scene you mentioned, of course, there's several mics a week, and there are also a handful of shows that get put together with the headliner that's typically from out of town.
Yeah.
How does it work here? What's the scene like?
Yeah, so we do open mics 3 times a week. Tuesdays at Patio Shays, which is can be a tougher room if you've ever been to one of those.
I've never been to Patty's. I've bombed at the Local and the Bookworm.
Oh, okay. Well, we've all been there. So Patty's is a little bit of a rougher room because you're performing a lot of the time to just semi-professional drunks who are there for a late night.
It's a local Irish pub.
Exactly, yeah.
In Beijing.
Exactly. So you get the foreigners in the back who, aren't there to like listen to comedy. You got people playing darts in the corner who certainly aren't there to listen to comedy. And then you got a few people who didn't know comedy was on that night, so they're sort of like trapped there, and it's a fun room to sort of test yourself. I like it. I like the sort of the challenge of going up there and try to get people on your side. So I mean, it's definitely a challenge, but if you're up to it, it's a fun challenge. On Wednesday, we do it at the local now, and that's a little bit more of a respectful room, a quieter room, and sort of more of a comedy club vibe, I guess you would say. But we just started there. They really renovated it, and it looks nice now. And then we do at Joe's on Friday, which is sort of a up and coming mic. So it's really hasn't, I don't think, found its feet yet, but it can be a good spot, especially when the soccer team is playing. They play right there at Worker Stadium, and Joe's Bar is in Gongti. So sometimes you get a little bit of leftover crowd from the soccer games or whatever that we're there to watch. And that's another kind of fun room just to go and try stuff out. And I mean, the stakes are super low there. I mean, like, it's a really small bar. There's not really a fail there. I mean, you can go.
Really?
No, I mean, I bomb there all the time. I like just go there and like, because again, it's one of those places where people, I don't know if they know that comedy's really on, so it's just kind of like, well, let's try to win them over, but at the same time, you want to try new stuff, and so I bomb there every once in a while, it's kind of fun.
And in terms of the other shows that get put on, yeah, I mean, there are things bringing comedians from out of town,
right,
out of I was going to say out of state, because I can't help myself, but out of Beijing, or even out of the country, out of the continent,
Yeah, so we, Kung Fu Comedy brings a lot of comedians over from America or, England or Australia or wherever. It doesn't really matter. But they bring them over to Shanghai, and they usually do like this little tour of Chengdu, Hangzhou, a couple nights in Shanghai, and then they come here for their last stop. So we just did a show last night for a comedian who used to be on Saturday Night Live, Dean Edwards.
How was that show?
Oh, it was fantastic. Yeah, it was packed room, good crowd, and he was fantastic. He did, I think, like 90 minutes, and he was just killing it. It was just killer stuff, and it's a lot of fun. I mean, those are the ones that I'd recommend to people who, if they've never seen a comedy show. I mean, they're a bit more pricey, but you're seeing a real guy with real credits, or a real woman with real credits come over here and do their thing, and so it's definitely a great opportunity. We usually get one a month. And so, if you've never been to a comedy show, those are the ones to check out at the Bookworm, usually on a Sunday night, because they're fantastic. And lot of great comedians come through here, and a lot of guys who have been on TV and stuff like that. So yeah, it's they're really fun shows, and like I said, last night was packed out. It was over 100 people in there, and it's just a lot of fun to be there, and good energy.
That's awesome. In terms of doing comedy, and this is a topic that comes up from different guests, not obviously comedy specifically, but you're in a profession that is outside of China is very much relies on free speech,
right?
And being able to absolutely not have limits on yourself.
Sure.
What's it like to craft material? And again, I don't know, do you find that your own tastes fall within sort of more, you are a nice Canadian boy after all. I don't want to put that on you. Maybe you're totally like a biker underneath the hoodie. Cut exterior, but you seem like a nice Canadian boy. So do you fall already into kind of the boundaries okay, or is this something you struggle with? Are your instincts in line with what's expected?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's similar to teaching a little bit because I was actually hired as a history teacher, and so I was teaching like Canadian history when I first got here. And the textbooks they used, they had a couple things that were not in line with what the Chinese government, wants to sort of portray. And so they actually would take the textbooks every once in a while, go through them, and take out pages if they didn't like them, which was always fun. And then finally they were just kind of like, what, we don't really need this course being taught here, so I'd like you to teach something different. And so that's similar to comedy, where it's like, you got to know sort of your audience, where you got to watch what you say, and you don't want to come off as disrespectful, especially being from not from this country. I don't want to come off as ignorant or putting my opinions on what other people might believe. So I kind of just keep it more light. I go more funny with my jokes. Like, I don't want to say funny, but I go more just whimsical. Things that aren't serious, like McDonald's or stuff like that, or teaching jokes or stuff like that, stuff that you're not going to get, in trouble with. It's just kind of, crazy stuff that's happened to you or whatever. So, I don't know. I think it's all about just kind of knowing your audience and, knowing that, you shouldn't be trying to be disrespectful. You shouldn't be going up there to try to be controversial.
Right.
You go up there and be funny.
That's a good... I lost my command of the English language.
No, I'm blowing you away with this.
I know. I'm speechless. That's probably a good instinct in general, and I've said more than once that my goal is to not be an ugly American.
Right. Yeah.
Because God knows we have enough to apologize for right now. So I really don't want to.
Guys,
I don't want to add my own. I know, right? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
What are you talking about? You're the paradigm of virtue in my country. I love my country, in case anybody gets their thong in a twist.
Yeah.
Just unknot it. So in terms of your actual material, you're saying that you're playing, and again, I've seen you, so I'm asking kind of just to hear your take on it, but I have my own sense of watching you do your thing. So your material is very personal, and it's more relatable kind of, it's like slice of life kind of stuff. I think, right?
Yeah, it's very kind of just everyday stuff. It's hyperbolic a lot of the time. It's exaggerated, but a lot of the time it's just things that have happened to me in the past that I've kind of that have stuck in my head, and I went, wow, that could be a bit if it's tuned down a little bit or trimmed down and written in a different way. It actually could work as a joke, and so that's kind of the approach I've taken, is just kind of taking things that have happened to me and twist them and then change them a little bit to play more to an audience. So
let me ask you a question, because we've had a handful of comedians on in the last few months, and I want to try to find fresh things to ask everybody. Specifically, how do you actually approach, since you're a joke guy, how do you approach writing a joke? I'm sure there's no one way, but how does it typically work for you?
A lot of the time it's a thought that has entered my head and just has sat there for a long time. So I've got ideas in my head that probably won't turn into bits for another 6 or 7 months, or 8 months even. Some of the bits that I'm doing now, I wrote 2 years ago basically, and just kind of have reworked them to the point where they're as tight as I can get them to be. And so it's a lot of that, and then it's a lot of sort of just listening to yourself, as painful as it might be, listening to your sets and just kind of going, well, that got a laugh, I should keep that, or I don't need this whole 30-second diatribe I went on here, I can get rid of that, so it's a lot of just, self-reflecting and editing to try to make yourself a little bit more polished and a little bit more tight. I keep using tight, but that's, really the term you want for it is, everything for a purpose up there, I guess, is the way I approach it.
So do you record all your sets?
I record most of them. I didn't record my one yesterday from the Dean Edwards one, which was painful for me. I was about to record it, and Lincoln brought me on, and I just fumbled my phone, and I didn't hit the record button. So I don't know. I got to see if anybody's got video of it, because it was one I definitely want to hear back.
Oh, so you were on the show last night? I was. Yeah. That's right. Who else was on that show?
So Lincoln Vander Vesthuizen, who's a very funny dude, one of the funniest I think in the city, and then Eva Hart, who's a up and coming female comedian, really one of my favorites. Yeah, really and they both were absolutely killer. So it was a great show altogether, and of course Dean was unbelievable. So yeah, I mean there's a lot of great talent here, and it is fun. It kind of the scene goes through dips. I find like there'll be times when it seems like all the comedians leave, and there's just a few hanging around. And actually, I was speaking to a comedian, Riley Hageman, recently, who's been here for a very long time, and has been one of the sort of I don't want to say founding fathers of CCC, but it seems like he's been around since then. But he was basically saying he stopped doing comedy for a while and then came back, and there was just an influx of new comedians. So it brings the energy back sometimes when you see all these new people doing new jokes, and you get excited, and your creativity starts to spark a little bit as well. So yeah, it's just I think it's good when the scene is getting an influx of talent, and so. I mean, if people are listening to this and are thinking like, I always wanted to do an open mic, definitely come out. I mean, it's a very supportive scene. Nobody's going to hate you if you bomb, So, come on out and try it.
What do you think is the future for this scene in terms of, growth, in terms of creative expansion, things like that?
Right. I just hope that, more, as people move here, and, I hope they give it a shot, and really just, if it's something you've ever wanted to do, I mean, this is a good place to really experiment with it and just try it out. I think proof of that, I fell in love with stand-up basically here, like actually doing it. I've loved the art of it, obviously, for a long time, but, just doing it on a regular basis, I learned to love it here, and I hope other people who, if they want to do comedy, I hope they can do the same thing. They can come out here, go to Patty's, eat your shit at Patty's every once in a while, go to the local, and, just have fun too. It's not life or death. It's, 4 minutes or 5 minutes of you up there telling jokes, and, it's a good stress relief, I think, especially if you're doing a job here like teaching and things like that. I'm sure, we all have different experiences coming to China and being in China, and, a lot of it works on stage if you can sort of make it into a funny anecdote.
Awesome. What do you see yourself doing, or I guess I should say, where do you see yourself, short-termish, 3-5 years from now? Doing and being somewhere? Do you think you would be in China longer term?
Yeah, I could see myself sort of being in Beijing for, the near future, whatever that may be, maybe a year, 2 years. I kind of play it by year now. I've sort of learned from my past that putting down a 3-year plan for myself doesn't really work. I'm a guy who changes on the fly a lot. So I can see myself in Beijing short term. I did some comedy in Shanghai over the summer, and I really like the scene down there too. A few guys who when I started doing comedy here have moved down there, and they're still doing great. And there's a lot of good opportunities down there as well to do comedy. So, I could see myself moving to Shanghai in the future, and, pursuing comedy while, hopefully doing, teaching or something like that, a job that I actually enjoy doing. So, that's probably the short-term plan for me. And then longer term, hopefully get to a city where I can just kind of grind and go at it every single night, whether that's a New York City or a Toronto, but I don't know. That's a long ways away from me, and I got a lot of growth before then, so.
Awesome. Eric, great to talk to you, man.
Thank you, man. Thank you for having me on.
All right, that's the show this week. Thanks again for listening. I will be back in a couple of days with the first episode of Big Fish Side Dish, so please be sure to check that out. You can find links about Eric or Comedy Club China in the show notes at crazyinagoodway.com as always. Thanks again, and I will see you soon.